Hey, everyone. Have you ever wondered if we're living in a cosmic time loop? Like one of those sci-fi movies where the main character gets stuck reliving the same day over and over again. Well, it might sound far-fetched, but some scientists actually think that something similar could be happening on a much larger scale. They believe that our universe, with everything in it, could be cycling through a never-ending loop, constantly repeating itself over and over again. Imagine that. Some people think that this idea is crazy, while others think it's a really interesting way to look at the universe. So what's going on here? Let's dive into some theories about cosmic time loops. You might have heard that the universe began with the Big Bang. This is a pretty widely accepted theory among astronomers and physicists. The Big Bang theory basically says that our universe started off small, hot and dense, and then expanded outward into the vastness that we know today. But what happened before the Big Bang? That's where things get a little bit tricky. One idea is that time didn't really exist before the Big Bang. It's kind of hard to wrap your mind around since we always experience time moving forward from the past to the future. But if you think about it, there really isn't anything in our everyday lives that suggests that time would have to go on forever or that it must have started with the Big Bang. Sure, we can measure time by watching things like the stars move or by counting atoms splitting during radioactive decay. But these are just ways that we humans have come up with to keep track of how long things have been happening. They don't necessarily mean that time itself has to be counting down or building up towards something. If we let go of the idea that time has to make sense in any particular direction, then it makes sense for it to be cyclical instead of linear. This means that time doesn't start with the Big Bang and end with heat death. Rather, it starts with the Big Bang and ends with the Big Crunch, which is another theory that astronomers have put forward to describe the ultimate fate of the universe. The Big Crunch is essentially the opposite of the Big Bang. Instead of the universe starting out small and hot, it ends with everything crashing together in a fiery ball of doom. This includes all the galaxies, stars, and planets, literally everything. If everything were to collapse in on itself, then it wouldn't just be the beginning of a new day in a time loop. It would be the beginning of a whole new universe. Some scientists think that the universe could keep doing this over and over again, endlessly recycling itself until the heat death of the universe, like a cosmic version of Groundhog Day, of course. This is just one possibility among many, but it's a fun one to think about nonetheless. So, what would a time loop like this look like? Well, it wouldn't necessarily look like the movies. In fact, it probably wouldn't even look like anything since time wouldn't exist. Before the Big Bang, there was no space or time or matter, so there would be nothing to see. And after the Big Crunch, the same would be true. Only after the Big Bang and before the Big Crunch would there be anything we could possibly observe. This means that any time loop would only contain one universe, and that universe would have to contain everything that exists. Of course, technically speaking, this isn't really a time loop in the traditional sense. A time loop implies that you're seeing the same thing happen over and over again. But if there's only one universe in the loop, then it wouldn't be possible to see the same thing twice. On the other hand, if there are an infinite number of universes contained within a single time loop, then you could see the exact same thing happen in every single one of them. This is a bit of a philosophical debate, but it does raise an interesting point. If we could somehow break the laws of physics and travel back in time to watch the first Big Bang, would it look familiar? Would it be like watching a movie on repeat? Or would it be totally different? Well, it turns out that some scientists actually think this might be possible. They believe that there could be a way to unify gravity with the other three fundamental forces of nature. When they do this, they also bring in a fifth dimension of space. This means that the universe would have 4 dimensions of space plus 1 dimension of time, making it 5-dimensional. Some scientists think that if we could find a way to access this 5th dimension, then we could use it to travel back in time. This would effectively allow us to watch the first Big Bang, but would it be a total waste of time? Let us say that we did manage to find a way to access the fifth dimension and watch the first Big Bang. What would we actually see? Well, it turns out that it probably wouldn't look anything like what we expect. The reason for this is that the universe was incredibly hot and dense at the very beginning. This means that the particles that make up matter couldn't form properly. In other words, there wouldn't be any atoms, molecules, or anything like that. So even if we were there watching the Big Bang, we wouldn't be able to see anything. We would literally be seeing the universe being created before our eyes, but without the benefit of hindsight, we wouldn't know that that's what we were seeing. We would just be sitting there in the darkness wondering if the chicken would ever stop clacking. It's also worth noting that time itself wouldn't work the same way that it does now. In the very beginning, time was effectively non-existent. So we wouldn't have been able to measure the passage of time even if we wanted to. And because the universe was so hot and dense, particles would have been moving incredibly fast. This would have made it impossible for light to travel through it. So even if we could see anything, we wouldn't have been able to see the details. Everything would have been a blurry mess. So what does all of this mean? Well, it means that we probably wouldn't have been able to survive the conditions on Earth during the first Big Bang. The chances are that even if we were there watching the universe being created, we wouldn't have been able to do anything. We wouldn't have been able to understand what we were seeing, and we probably wouldn't have survived long enough to care. This raises another interesting point. If we were trapped in a time loop like this, would we ever know it? After all, the only way that we could have known that we were in a time loop is if we broke the loop and went back to the beginning. But if that's possible, then why haven't we done it yet? The answer is that we don't know whether or not it's possible, and we'll probably never find out. This is because the time loop hypothesis is just that, a hypothesis. There's no evidence that it's true, and there's no way that we could ever prove it. However, just because it's not possible to prove it doesn't mean that it's not true. In fact, some scientists think that it's the most likely explanation for what happened at the beginning of the universe. Of course, this is just their opinion, and ultimately, we'll never know for sure what happened at the beginning of the universe. However, it is fun to think about the possibilities. So do you think we're living in a cosmic time loop? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to learn more about the universe. Thanks for watching.